Okay, so now we're going to focus on moving to the next unit, which is talking about Newton's laws of motion. And this is the area of physics that we like to call dynamics. Okay, because we're going to combine the kinematic motion, which previously we just called simply duck-on-pond physics. Okay, you can see it right here. So we just call that simply duck-on-pond physics. To now we're going to start going underneath the water. Okay, so now we're going to start seeing that duck. Right. So what is he doing below the water line? So here's our water line. Here's our duck. Right. And before we talked about how we're just going to kind of focus up here for kinematics. Right. But now we're going to go underneath the water and we're going to find that dynamic area. Right. So now we're going to watch that duck's feet go all over the place. We're going to watch him kick, sea life. We're going to watch him kick the plant life. Okay, so now we're going to dive into that water. Okay, so in this unit we're going to go under the water to see why objects move. Before we were talking about we're talking about how they move, right? There are descriptors. Now we're going to talk about why. Okay. But before we do that, we do need to establish something that we call a system. Okay, so a system, all right, is simply the object that we're going to choose to analyze. So we're going to look at different objects and how they interact with its environment, okay, and things that come in from external to the environment. So everything else outside of that system we call the environment. Okay. And then this will consist of objects that might interact with the system. So there's that word again, talk about interactions, thus affecting its motion. Okay? These interactions that come from outside of the system is what we call external interactions, okay, or external forces. And we'll define the word force here in a second. But basically forces are going to do one of two things, right? They're going to touch the object, okay? They're going to push the object, or they're going to pull the object. Okay, so those external forces are going to do one of those three things. Okay. Now, sometimes what happens is a system is something greater than, or more than what we really need to look at. So, for example, a car. So a car has a bunch of parts inside the system, like the wheels, the axles, and so forth, the engine. Okay, so if we're looking at the car as a system, the components of the car are internal to the system. And in the grand scheme of things, we don't necessarily have to worry about those internal interactions or those internal forces, unless a question specifically has us address it. Okay, but these internal interactions inside the system is something that we don't have to worry about. So if I have two blocks, right, that are touching each other, and I'm going to push one of the blocks, I'm going to call my system the two blocks. Okay. So if I draw a dotted line around my system, right? No, my system has block 1 and block 2 inside of it. But and as we go throughout the unit here, we're going to learn that block 1 exerts a force on block 2, right? And block 2 exerts a force on block 1. But if we look at what is the acceleration of the system, these two forces are now internal, right? And so therefore, the only force we're going to look at is this red arrow, because that is now external system. That is causing the change in motion of those two blocks. Okay, it's much like a car. Okay, if we look at the car as a system, the interaction between the tires and the road, that's what really moves a car, right? So that is what. So that interaction between the cars and the tire and the road, that's external to the system, and so we have to account for that. But what happens in the engine and so forth is internal. So therefore, we don't have to account for it unless we're specifically asked to worry about that. Okay. Now, in the next video, we're going to look at specific force, something called the gravitational force, because it's a very key factor in a lot of what we're going to do. It's one of the forces that's really going to be what causes one of the external forces that exist and pushing and pulling us here on Earth.